T. Higgins is doubtful. DK Metcalf is out. Drake May has actually been ruled in. So these are just a couple reasons why I wait till the end of the week to go through every single matchup to find the must start and sit wide receivers in week 9 fantasy football. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers working on a Saturday to get you this type of video. The New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers is our first matchup here. And listen, Chris Olave, I've had my disagreements with him. I don't like his effort a lot of times, but in reality, it's just too good of a matchup for me to sit Chris Olave. He's a must-start guy. Carolina's 21st versus the wide receiver position. He's getting Derek Carr back this week. It just would make no sense if I was to call him anything less than a must-start guy. Now, I think that Xavier Legette is actually a pretty good option if he goes. Xavier Legette was added to the injury report on Thursday because of a toe injury, and he is now questionable. So this has obviously been in a situation where we can't trust Xavier Legette every single week when they had Deontay Johnson. Now without Deontay Johnson in there, he's the best option. But what I will say about this is look back to recent weeks. Anytime a player goes on the injury report on Thursday or Friday late in the week, it usually is not a good sign for them playing in the following game. So I don't know whether he's going to play or not. As of right now, he's a true questionable. But if he goes, New Orleans is 25th versus wide receivers. Xavier Legette is a big play threat. I believe it can happen. And Jalen Coker is also a viable option this week for the Carolina Panthers for the exact same reasons I just laid out. And especially if it's no Xavier Legette, Coker's definitely a guy that you could definitely play this week. The Washington Commanders at the New York Giants is our next matchup here. And listen, Malik Nabers is easily must start every single week. Washington is 20th versus wide receivers. You don't really ever question whether to put Malik Nabers in your lineup or not. This is a guy who's getting 10 plus targets basically per game. Sometimes he'll hit because he has Daniel Jones, and sometimes Jones, he's like a night and day player, right? Like every game, you don't know what you're going to get. Either the turnover Daniel Jones or actually pretty efficient Daniel Jones. So last week, Malik Nabers did fine in fantasy. You don't put him on the bench. And then Terry McLaurin, obviously, must start territory. This guy has been awesome in fantasy football. New York is 19th versus the wide receiver position in fantasy football. So with Terry McLaurin, this guy doesn't go on your bench because it's been him and nobody else in Washington. Jaden Daniels obviously is playing in this game. You always play Terry McLaurin when it is Jaden Daniels. Wan'Dale Robinson always remains a viable flex option. The guy gets tons of targets, a lot of them towards the line of scrimmage, so he's definitely more of a PPR play, obviously. But like I said, the New York Giants are taking on the Commanders here, who are 20th versus wide receivers in fantasy. So Wan'Dale Robinson every week is a viable flex candidate, but especially in a game where Washington is not great covering wide receivers here. The Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills this week. Listen, Tyreek Hill is always a must-start guy. I gotta be honest though, like Tyreek Hill it's been majorly disappointing. I mean, the first week back with Tua, it wasn't like it was bad, but he hasn't hit the big play yet. A lot of it was just kind of like shorter middle route stuff. We want the big play from Tyreek, and I don't know how likely it is this week, to be honest with you. Buffalo is 8th versus wide receivers in fantasy football, and I've been covering this all week. Tua's record versus the Bills is atrocious. The Bills always beat the brakes off of the Miami Dolphins here. So unless Tyreek hits a big play, I don't love his upside this particular week. But of course, he's Tyreek Hill. You put him in must-start category. And then you've got just a bunch of guys that are flexible, right? I like Amari Cooper the best if he goes. Amari Cooper is a true questionable with a wrist injury. He was in and out of practice this week. So with Amari Cooper, just make sure to watch this one. Miami is first versus wide receivers. So obviously, Buffalo's wide receiver options, maybe you're getting scared off by it. Listen, this is a fugazi. I've talked about this for weeks. You can run on Miami. So a lot of teams, like especially without Tua, they were getting up on Miami and just not throwing the ball because they didn't freaking need to. So that's like why you see some of the worst run defenses that are really good in pass defense. It's a fugazi. It's a total fugazi. So I'm not worried about Amari Cooper. The only thing I'm worried about is Buffalo beating the brakes off the Dolphins and then not having to throw the ball in the fourth quarter. So that's the only thing I'm worried about, but I like him better than Waddle. Waddle is just in a situation where he just has not looked very good at all this year, and I get it, like a lot of it is because Tyreek Hill is who he is. So we need Waddle to hit on the big play, and he just hasn't really done it much since Tua came back. So I think he's flexible, obviously, because it's Waddle and he's got Tua, but I'm not wild on this one. And then I would probably play him over Shakir and Coleman. Like I said, the biggest concern for me is that Buffalo just gets up really early and they don't need to throw the ball that much towards the end of the game. And it just diminishes the opportunities for these guys. But obviously, the way Buffalo's offense is playing so far, you can absolutely throw out a Buffalo wide receiver, whichever one you choose. Amari's my favorite. Odell Beckham Jr. is a bum. Let's move on. The Los Angeles Chargers at the Cleveland Browns. Ladd McConkey, I called him a must start this week for very good reason. We saw the breakout last week, right? He's been getting targeted consistently like 6 to 8 times a game. That's great. But what we saw last week was him hit on big plays, getting into the end zone. That was big. And Cleveland is 26 versus the wide receiver position. You play Ladd McConkey in a lot of situations here. He's in my lineup everywhere I've got Ladd McConkey this week. Cedric Tillman is, listen, a lot of people are big on him this week. I'm cautioning people on this one. Pump the brakes here. I think Tillman will have good future weeks, but the Chargers are second versus the wide receiver position in fantasy. This is not a defense that's easily giving up points to wide receivers. I like Tillman. He's my favorite wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns at this point, but right now, this matchup is not very good for him. I think he's got better weeks ahead, and I think a lot of people will play him this week and just end up regretting it and dropping this guy. Those of you who are listening right now, if you have Tillman, just wait to avoid the expectations not being able to come to fruition. My expectations are low for him this week, but he's the best option between Johnston and Jerry Jeudy. Johnston's a big play threat, not much more than that. And Jerry Jeudy, again, is just dealing with the same bad matchup here. The New England Patriots at the Tennessee Titans is our next matchup. And there's no must starts in here. This is the worst game of possibly the entire season. I mean, this is a disaster. This game is horrible. It would have been a lot worse, though, if Drake May wasn't playing. Drake May was cleared by the concussion protocol and is going to play just right before I started filming here. Again, why we wait to do these videos until Saturday. Getting these accurate information pieces makes Kayshon Boutte a guy that I had benched. A guy who's, I think, a decent flex option. Not decent. He's not a decent flex option, but he's a low-end flex option. Kayshon Boutte has been working well with Drake May over the last several weeks. So I think that he's a decent play. My favorite is Douglas because May has looked good, but obviously they're not better than Ridley. Ridley is just in a situation where it just depends on quarterback play, right? Will Levis questionable in this game. Who knows if they'd even play him, right? They haven't made a decision. They said they were both preparing to play the Patriots this week. They're a disaster, right? They're a total disaster, and Calvin Ridley is just in a situation where he's very reliant. And New England's 22nd versus wide receivers in fantasy, so the matchup upside is actually there. It just all comes down to whether Tennessee plays the right quarterback or not, and whether that quarterback can actually give Calvin Ridley the ball. The Dallas Cowboys at the Atlanta Falcons here. Obviously, our two must-starts, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London. No reason to really talk about it, although I will say CeeDee does have a great matchup here. Atlanta is 24th versus wide receivers. So CeeDee Lamb could continue this hot breakout after the bye week, and I do like CeeDee Lamb a lot this week, and I think just moving forward, he's going to be fantastic. And then our flex guys here, Darnell Mooney and Jalen Tolbert. Now, Dallas is 9th versus the wide receiver position here. I don't really care. Like, this is, again, it's not like they're all of a sudden really good defensively against wide receivers. Just is not the case. It's like Miami. Dallas gets they open up their legs when it comes to run defense. Like, anybody can run all over the Dallas Cowboys here. It's not that teams can't throw on them. So Darnell Mooney, I prefer him over Jalen Tolbert still because he's just got a better quarterback. Dak Prescott has been playing like dog lately, but of course Jalen Tolbert is playable because the guy is a good player, and he's really just taken over as this wide receiver too. And the matchup is good going up against the 24th ranked defense versus wide receivers in fantasy. The Las Vegas Raiders at the Cincinnati Bengals is our next matchup. Obviously, Jamar Chase is must start. Really no reason to talk about it. Jacoby Myers is in pretty high upside flex territory. I called him a buy low candidate weeks ago, and, he just came back from his ankle injury last week. Did really well, by the way. And he's just a guy that's going to consistently get 10 targets a game. The Bengals defense is 15th versus wide receivers, middle of the pack basically. And Jacoby Myers is just in a situation where he's actually a good receiver. Like in real life, I can rely on this guy. He's actually a good player. I'd play him over Andre Yeshivas, who, by the way, is flexible only because T. Higgins is doubtful in this game. So there won't be T. Higgins here. Andre Yeshivas, all he showed us at the beginning of the year was that he's a touchdown-reliant guy. This guy's not going to go out and get you 6 catches for 70 yards today and a touchdown. That's not what he's going to do. He's going to be touchdown-reliant. So Myers is definitely the best flex option of the bunch, but Yeshivas is going to give you touchdown upside against the Raiders' atrocious defense. The Denver Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens this week. And listen, again, no must starts here. Like, I will say this. Zay Flowers is my favorite in this matchup here for a couple reasons. Number one, Zay Flowers this week is taking on the Broncos, who are really good against receivers. 6 versus wide receivers here. So why do I like him best? Well, the reason is because he's not going to drop Pat Surtain. Mark my words. This is not going to be Pat Surtain versus Zay Flowers. What it will be, and the reason I called Deontay Johnson a must bench this week, it will be Deontay Johnson versus Pat Surtain. That's what it will be. Deontay has spent most of his time on the outside, whether it was with Pittsburgh or Carolina over the years. He's an outside receiver. Zay is more in the slot. They move him around a bunch. So in addition to Deontay drawing the matchup with Surtain, think about the 3 biggest trades we had with wide receivers over the past several weeks. Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, and Amari Cooper. Only one of those receivers hit in their first game with their new team, Amari Cooper. Other 2, Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins, they both did bad their first week. It's okay. They'll have better weeks ahead. I think Deontay has better weeks ahead of him. This is not his matchup. I like Zay much better. And with the Broncos receivers, listen, the Broncos are getting better offensively, number one, and they're taking on Baltimore, who is dead last versus wide receivers in fantasy. Courtland Sutton is a good option. He's a good option this week. I like Troy Franklin this week too. Troy Franklin, the chemistry is building with Bo Nix. And I think that this matchup is just simply too good to pass up on. And it's not just the matchup. The Broncos are getting better offensively. Bo Nix has done really well over the past month. So I do think that Broncos receivers are viable. I would put Sutton basically in the same tier as Zay this week. But I would say Franklin is definitely well below Sutton. The Chicago Bears at the Arizona Cardinals this week. Listen, no must-starts here either. Marvin Harris Jr. is my favorite, but he's really not that far off from DJ Moore. Arizona is 23rd versus wide receivers, but I don't like DJ Moore because Caleb Williams is so inconsistent at finding DJ Moore, and this offense is a disaster. It really is a disaster. It's a talented hot mess, is what the Bears offense is. But at the same time, Marvin Harris Jr., he's been inconsistent playing himself as well, and their Chicago Bears are 5th versus wide receivers. This is not good for wide receivers in fantasy this week. I don't prefer to play any of these wide receivers. Marvin's the best, DJ Moore's not far behind, and then right below them, you've got Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze, who are basically in the same tier as well. Because again, the Bears have an opportunity this week. 23rd versus wide receivers is what the Cardinals are. I just don't trust this offense. I think Shane Waldron is a disgrace for a play caller in Chicago. If you want to know the truth, he's just a disgrace. He's always been a loser. Nobody likes him. This guy's he's just a loser. Jack Smith-Njigba warned the Bears on his way out. So I just think that with the Chicago Bears options, good matchup here. I would like to take a shot on DJ Moore. I just don't trust this offense as a whole. And then Michael Wilson, I'm just not playing him against the Chicago Bears. The Jacksonville Jaguars at the Philadelphia Eagles this week. A.J. Brown, fire him up. No questions asked. Jacksonville's 29th versus wide receivers, which makes Devonta Smith a must-start in my book as well. Brian Thomas Jr. is a game-time decision. So is Gabe Davis. Obviously, if Brian Thomas Jr. plays, you play him. Philly's 12th versus wide receivers. They're actually looking better defensively. But in reality, like, Brian Thomas Jr. is their best playmaker, so you don't put him on the bench regardless here. So if he plays, just make sure to watch this one because we probably won't know up until like 90 minutes before game time tomorrow. So just keep an eye on this one, but if he plays, I'm definitely playing him. And then Gabe Davis, same thing. You know, I wouldn't like to play Gabe Davis either way, but the reality is they need him. Like, they just flat out need him. Their running backs are hurt, Christian Kirk is down, and Brian Thomas Jr. is not 100%. So if Gabe Davis goes, he's playable, and Parker Washington going to get targets. So he is definitely going to be a flexible play this week. I don't think that Parker Washington will ever be a big play threat. That's not in his nature. This guy coming out of Penn State a couple years ago was definitely a guy that was going to get you targets and a lot of these shorter routes that Christian Kirk was kind of doing. He's a lower end Christian Kirk, which makes him playable because they need to throw to somebody, but definitely not my favorite play of the bunch. And I'll tell you one thing I just love about this matchup right here is that Jalen Hurts on underdog is being shortchanged. 0.5 total yards is what his projection is for new customers only. This is the best way for a new customer to win free money. If I was a new customer, I'd be hopping all over this. Definitely get into it. Grab the link that's there in the comments below. Use code FVEN to sign up for Underdog. And when you play this sweat-free projection for Jalen Hurts this week, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. The Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks this week. Cooper Kupp, fire him up because Puka Nacua, if he plays, you play him. But this guy went down. Same knee, same injury on Thursday's practice. Apparently, they said he could play, but he did not practice on Friday. So, basically, game time call is what it looks like it boils down to here. If Puka plays, you play him. You definitely just play this guy. It's just been a lost season for Puka, aside from last week, basically. And it's really sad. I mean, it's just a sad thing. Because Seattle's 17th versus wide receivers, definitely beatable. So, I like the matchup potential here. Just keep an eye on this one, because if he plays, I'll definitely play him. And then with the Seahawks here, obviously, it's a jumbled mess right now. DK Metcalf is out again, and Los Angeles, their defense, I've been talking about them for a couple weeks now. Their defense is low-key pretty good, and they're getting better on a weekly basis. 7th versus wide receivers in fantasy right now. They're doing really well. So Jackson Smith-Njigba is not a must-start. In a PPR league, he could be deemed as a must-start, but he's a high-end flex guy because he just doesn't have a ton of upside to get in the end zone. Tyler Lockett, same deal. Except definitely not as good as JSN because he's not going to get the targets that JSN will. And then Tutu Atwell and Demarcus Robinson really are only flexible if Puka doesn't play. So just make sure to watch this one because Jordan Whittington is also questionable in this game as well. So I would definitely want to play Tutu over Demarcus Robinson just because of targets. But obviously, none of them matter if Puka Nacua plays. The Detroit Lions at the Green Bay Packers, my favorite matchup of the week. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is must start either way. This is just too good of a matchup here. There's so many points that are available here, and I'm planting my flag, sticking my neck on the table for Jayden Reed this week. A guy I've said Deebo Samuel Jr. every time I talk about this guy. I love Jayden Reed. The reality is the past month been pretty underwhelming. This is a matchup I want. Detroit's 28th versus wide receivers, and this game is sure to bring fireworks. It's the NFC North showdown right here for who basically leads the division right now. So I think Green Bay is going to come in hot. Jayden Reed is going to come in firing on all cylinders, and Jordan Love is expected to play. I want Jayden Reed in this game. And I also am fine with playing every freaking option. I'm fine with it. Dobbs is a high-end flex. Watson this week, I just have kind of a gut feeling this is a touchdown game for Watson. I'm actually kind of move stuff around so I can play him in my personal leagues because I see the upside with Detroit being so bad in the secondary. I see the upside this week. Khalif Raymond, definitely playable as well this week because there's no Jameson Williams again, and Raymond was involved last week. And Dontavian Wicks, not my favorite of the bunch, but definitely the upside's freaking there. So I want options in this matchup. I want options, man. I'm telling you guys, this is a good game to play wide receivers in because there's going to be tons of points everywhere. The Indianapolis Colts at the Minnesota Vikings this week. And listen, this is also a good matchup for wide receivers. I really like the potential for scoring in this Sunday night game. Justin Jefferson, it doesn't matter. The Colts are 16th versus wide receivers. Who really cares when it comes to Justin Jefferson? I just feel like a broken record saying that. Josh Downs, 31st versus wide receivers is what Minnesota is. Their weakness has been the pass. I called Josh Downs a must-start this week, partly because of that, and also partly because Joe Flacco with Josh Downs is averaging like 15 to 16 fantasy points per game, depending on your format. He's been Joe Flacco's guy, and Josh Downs, just on a route-running basis, looks like the best wide receiver in Indianapolis. Josh Downs is must-start this week, and Pittman's a high-end flex option. He's done obviously much better with Joe Flacco as well. And again, the matchup's great. I just think Josh Downs is the better one of the bunch, but no slight here. Like, Pittman is going to be a good play this week. Most situations, I'm telling people to play him right now. And then Addison, flexible because I think the matchup is beatable, but this guy has been a disaster over the last several weeks here. And then our Monday night game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Kansas City Chiefs. No must starts here. But I will tell you this. Last week, I was off of DeAndre Hopkins. This week, I like him a lot better. And a lot of people don't want to play him. I think he's the best option in this matchup by a mile. Tampa Bay is 27th versus wide receivers, and DeAndre Hopkins is going to take this Rashee Rice role. He's not the fastest. He's not going to get you big, deep balls. That's not Hopkins' game at this point. He's reliable over the middle, he runs good routes, and he's never going to drop a ball for you. So he's going to get 10 to 8 targets in this game and end up with like 6 catches for 60 or 70 yards. Maybe a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins is the best option this week. Worthy, just because of the matchup, I like him, and obviously the big play upside is always there every single week. And then Raheem Jarrett, I actually like him better than Jalen McMillan this week. I think Raheem Jarrett came out and showed in the slot last week that he was a pretty reliable option for Baker Mayfield. Kansas City's tough though, 4th versus wide receivers, and that's also partly why I said to just bench Jalen McMillan this week. And I don't think that Jalen McMillan is ready to take on a number 1 role. So I would personally rather play Raheem Jarrett than I would play Jalen McMillan, who I called a bench player this week. So let me know how your lineup looks this week. And if you want to see where all these receivers ended up in my top 30 wide receiver rankings this week, click on this video right here.